Hello, everyone, and welcome again to the next episode of Smarter Change, provided by Hassan Archer Consulting. I'm your host, Hassan Archer. Each session, we dive into an interview with senior leaders to understand how they have led meaningful change inside their clients, companies, and organizations. I believe lasting change within companies requires everyone to continually assess and evaluate how they get things done in a changing world. Today, I'm excited to speak with our guest, John Montague. John often refers to himself as a recovering Microsoft employee. We'll have to ask him more about that today. But he has over 20 years in leadership positions running sales and marketing at 2 public companies and 5 private ones. He has also participated in 5 startups, 3 of his own. I'm super excited to have this conversation today. And so let's just start off today by saying, John, welcome to the show.
Hassan, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Pleasure to have you. So John, let's give our audience a little background on yourself. Just who is John Montague?
Oh man, that's a loaded question. I'm just a guy. I've had the fortunate pleasure to participate in a lot of different companies in a lot of different roles. I've got 20 plus years in sales and marketing. I've done a little bit of everything from large companies such as Microsoft to small startups like one of my own, Novus RX. I guess what I'd like to do, during that time, I jokingly tell people I've made every mistake you can possibly make. So please call me so that I can share with you my mistakes so that you don't have to make them again. But I've learned from all those mistakes. And I mean, I've made some doozies, at Novus RX, we bootstrapped it. We funded it ourselves. Right when the iPad probably could have got funding very easily. We probably should have. But venture capital has changed a lot over the years. And it was in a big change right then. And when I was coming up, I'd seen a lot of what I fondly refer to as vulture capital, where people got their companies taken away from us or taken away from the founders. They wanted to bring in the professional management. Since then, thank goodness, companies like Andreas and Horowitz and others have decided to say, well, rather than push out the founders, let's just teach them how to be CEOs. And I think that's a much better approach. And we probably should have availed ourselves of that, because one of the things that we didn't do and that hurt our company, the relationships that come along with some of that venture capital, the Rolodex in particular, can be tremendously beneficial to a startup. And when the failure rate for startups today is still 9 out of 10, that's something to strongly consider as you're going out. So I have many other stories to share, though.
I look forward to hearing them today. So one thing I want to ask you about, just from what you said, is make mistakes. And I like the fact that you own that. And I feel like today, in a lot of businesses, for a lot of people's careers, they have this idea that they should never make a mistake and that you need to be perfect out the gate and have all the answers. But what's your thought on that? How do you save space for it's okay to make a mistake, but then also we need to have a high degree of professionalism and performance and results as a business person?
It's interesting that you say that, because I don't think enough people admit their mistakes. Everybody, especially in this day and age, I meet so many people who are much better known than you or I. And you and I just stumbled into each other at an event in Southern California and just kind of hit it off, because I think we look at things similarly, especially things like this. Mistakes are part of life. And there are a lot of people who don't ever want to admit that they've ever made a mistake. But then you'll continue to make them. And the only way that you attain wisdom, I believe, is by making mistakes and learning from them. And the key part, obviously, is the second piece, learning from them. So, for example, there's a gentleman out there I guess I will keep him nameless, but he'd probably enjoy the story. When I first became a manager, I sucked. I mean, I don't mean I was not good. I mean, I sucked. The company was Ashton Tate, and I was a star sales guy, and I got promoted to this position where I had some folks working for me. And I tried to manage them the way I was successful. Huge mistake, huge. I probably made his life miserable. I'm sure he's forgiven me since then, but some of the biggest mistakes I see successful people when they first manage, is they try and make the person do what they did to become successful, especially in sales. And this is why I think a lot of sales leaders fail. There's 2 things you should do. Is one, not manage them like you manage yourself. And the second thing you should do is shut up and listen. because so much of sales is talking that we don't listen. And when you're a manager, the most important thing you can do is listen and watch and learn, and then try and nudge, try and coach, try and get people pointed in the right direction, but don't try and do it for them. Try to unlock what motivates them to get them where you need to be. And that's the definition of leadership and management and good management. But admitting your mistakes and learning from them, I think, is the first step towards that, or really any other success. And in this day of personal branding, which I'm still getting used to, and I find still a bit unseemly, yes, we all want to be well known, we all want to be respected, but I find the best way to do that is to be yourself. And by being myself, I've made lots of mistakes, and I freely admit them, because that's how I learn from them. If you're afraid of your mistakes, that's going to cause you problems. If you're afraid of poking fun at yourself, we've all worked for a leader who you cannot make fun of them. In fact, I recently worked for a guy who's got serious issues. He had this thing where he kept telling me that somebody, XYZ employee, disrespected him. What I came to learn was that meant that whenever somebody disagreed with them, he considered that disrespecting them. I mean, classic narcissism. I mean, that's nuts. And he will never see that he's built a culture that can only be described as the beatings will stop when morale improves. and I know that sounds funny, but I mean, I've seen it, and it was like that. And where that company has some very bright people, for the vast majority, they come in, everybody looks like they're working, and they're doing exactly what they need to do to take a paycheck. And that unfortunately is a lot of companies. And that's not what you want, especially in technology. The funny thing about our business, the software business, or really any business that requires a lot of intellectual capital, the most important assets go home every night. And I've always said that let's give them a really good reason to come back tomorrow and do their best work.
I love that.
And it's, that's how you really overcome obstacles. That's why startups are so exciting. They're also chaotic, by the way. So for anybody who's never done a startup, don't think it's all Mai Tais and Yahtzee. I mean, it's a lot of craziness and a lot of nuts. You'll see some bizarre behavior, but if you get everybody rowing the boat in the right direction, you can really do some great things.
Yeah. You mentioned, the first thing you said was, when you have a leader who wants to, it's almost like make a carbon copy of themselves. And they see management as, here's my path, here's why I was successful, therefore you need to follow my footsteps. And what I end up seeing with that a lot of times is it creates a culture of toxicity, because now there's one right path. And so if you're not on that straight and narrow, and you're not putting your feet directly into the holes where the founder went ahead of you, you get ostracized, right? And you're punished, which doesn't leave room to value your assets, like you said, which are the people who go home. And then they may not want to come back because they have strengths, they have weaknesses, just like all of us do in leadership. But if we're not taking advantage of what they do well, because we're saying, no, these 3 things matter, those other 10 things don't, they're not going to come back. Your company is going to pay a bunch of money, especially in software, for expensive people, and you're not going to take advantage of what they have to offer you as a company. And that is a serious problem with management that I've seen throughout my career.
Well, it is, and I think it's unfortunately more widespread than any of us would like to admit. I've always been a bit outspoken, and this is one reason I'm a recovering Microsoft employee. When I was at Microsoft, they didn't appreciate that. They really wanted you to march kind of lockstep. There was a little click. If you were in the click, you got more stock options, and you got this and you got that, and you could go on your merry way. But if you were outside the click, it was a different game. And I was in the Orange County sales office. There's some great people I worked with there, but there was a click, and I wasn't in it, and I was never going to be in it, because people asked me what I thought, and I would tell them. That's me. This has not been good for my career, by the way.
Yeah.
But that's just who I am. It has hurt me. A perfect example. When I was at Platinum Software, now Epicor. Um, I was either senior manager or director, but I started getting guest invited to the executive team meetings. And that was exciting. I mean, it was a huge career move. I was excited, I'd be in there and, I'm with the big shots, and every once in a while somebody would ask me my opinion. And unfortunately I would give it. And usually that was really good for me. I was well thought of. I was a pretty bright guy, usually had some good ideas. But I will tell you one time when the CEO said, I went to join that company right from Microsoft. One of the founders recruited me, and they were one of my customers. And they were my first turnaround. I mean, they had an accounting scandal. Their stock went from 33 to 3. They whacked the CEO. They had a lot of change, a lot of turmoil. I went there after that because I thought it would be an exciting time to learn. And it was, but let me tell you, it was not for the faint of heart. We had to take out about 300 to 400 employees. We had round after round of layoff. And one of these times the CEO said, well, we're going to have another 10% cut across the board. And I raised my hand and I said, why the hell are we going to do that? And the whole room got quiet. And I just made the point that, listen, we all have our lifeboat. And if you're a manager, I would suggest and I would hope that you always have a lifeboat. And the lifeboat is, if I had to cut, who would go? If I got to cut 1, 2, 3, or 4. And it's not the fun part of managing, but it's part of managing. You have to really look at it. And if you've ever run your own business, this is how you survive, because businesses live or die by cash flow. And sometimes some people have to go away. I've had to let a lot of people go. I've always tried to do it with dignity, look them in the eye and tell them exactly why, and that it's not their fault. It's our fault. The business screwed up. It's a terribly difficult thing to do, but you should do it that way. I brought that up in that executive meeting, that a 10% across the board cut is the dumbest thing I've ever heard. We all know who the dead weight is. You should hold us accountable as managers to get rid of some of that dead weight. And if we have to cut into the healthy flesh, so be it. But let's do it smart. Let's not just across the board is the dumbest thing I've ever heard. And they still do that today. In fact, I guess the best example out recently, who I really admire, is Brian Chesky of Airbnb. Recently with COVID, their business tanked. And this young man who's never been a CEO before stepped up and took out 25% of his workforce. But he did it with so much integrity that I'm sure a lot of people still will hate him and say bad things about him. But as an outside observer, I don't think you could do it better. He gave them he did it early enough so he could give extraordinarily generous benefits. I think the minimum was 14 weeks pay, something along those lines. It was very, very significant. Created an outplacement form for them to provide services, true outplacement services, not the kind of token, oh, go see XYZ Corp and maybe they'll help you, but was proactive about it. And in this day and age, especially where, yes, everybody says it's a rotten job market, but there's a lot of talent out there. And when you start to build a reputation of taking care of people, the good talent will come and flock to you. If you do it with looking them in the eye, treating them with respect, treating them with integrity. I have fired people that, only one of them has actually thanked me later, but it usually is not a bad thing for them. They'll go on to do something better elsewhere. It's when you start to get subversive about it and sneaky and, it's not a fun thing to do, but the hard things in life never are. So, as the old saying goes, suck it up, buttercup. This is why you get paid the dollars. Do it with respect, do it with honor, do it with integrity, and do it quickly, and then move on. And if you ever do have to do a cut, my advice is always try to do it once. So cut deeper than you think you have to, because there's nothing worse than the death by 1,000 cuts, because that's where you start to lose the good people, because they're going to say, well, I don't want to be next. I better go get a job now. And at Platinum in particular, the way that I did that among my team, which is about 27 strong, every day I would have a meeting. What's the rumor? Let me hear it right now. I will confirm it or deny it and tell you why, and then we're going to go back to business. Because the other thing that happens is that water cooler chatter can kill you. It'll kill productivity.
Yes.
So in times like this, in times like COVID, it's all the more important to be very upfront with your employee base. Do it with integrity, do it with honor. They will respect you. They will consider you a leader. They will walk through walls for you if they have to, as long as you're honest and upfront with them. It's the BS that everybody can smell a mile away.
Yep. And I think a lot of leaders don't give their people enough credit for that. And I've sat through these meetings on both sides of the layoffs. And the idea that leadership will give a speech and say, unfortunately, we have to let go of a group of people today, but don't worry, trust us, we've got this, we're good. And the leadership goes off in their office and they, pat each other's backs and say, this is amazing, we did a great job, I think we're going to be good, I think they bought it. And then all the employees go back to their desks and say, okay, well, we're going to mourn the fact that Johnny and Kathy left. And meanwhile, how's your resume looking? Because I'm not sure these guys, gave us the real deal. And then to your point about 1,000 cuts, the next time you come back and do a wave of layoffs, all those employees are saying, well, I have now no confidence in leadership because they promised me that we had a plan. And obviously there's no plan because things are getting worse. So now you have a bunch of people who are half in and half out, who are probably spending most of their time taking recruiting phone calls at their desks or in their cars, and you've now lost control of your business. While you at the top may think you have control, actually you don't have control. And that's when you start to see the ugly side. And this is something I've talked about briefly before we got on this call or on this meeting today, which was the idea of taking a log and turning it over, which I give credit to that to Kerry Ransom. He'd posted that today on LinkedIn. But you turn the log over and then you see all the rot and the insects and the stuff that's really going on. And a lot of leaders, a lot of managers miss that because they think, oh, they totally bought it. Everyone smiled and clapped and we had a nice town hall meeting. But that's not management. That's not leadership.
No, it's not. I mean, leadership is about being vulnerable. Good leadership is about being vulnerable. Good management is about being vulnerable. I mean, I worked for a guy not long ago that literally wanted to know nothing about his employees. And it showed. I mean, there was a woman that he'd hired, and she was very smart, very sweet, very productive. She's, she was the gal that sat at the front desk, and it was a position, but didn't really leverage her. He still to this day calls her by the wrong name. And I'd been calling her by the wrong name because that's what I heard him call her. And then I heard from another employee after I'd been there for over a month calling this woman the wrong name. And I went up to her, I said, why didn't you tell me? She goes, it's no big deal. I don't really care. I said, well, I care. I care. Yeah. I said, it makes me feel like an idiot calling you the wrong name. But the owner to him, it doesn't matter. He didn't want to know anything about, just if your kid's sick, if you're having a problem. I'm sorry, that's management and that's leadership. I mean, the number of times I've had somebody in my office telling me really things I didn't want to know about them, but they needed some help. They needed somebody to listen. And, in this day and age, especially, I've never had a job where I work 9 to 5. It's 10, 12 hours a day. And if it's a startup, probably 14, 15.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that's healthy. I'm not saying that's right, but that's the world that I lived in. And so people bring their problems. I mean, it's part of life. And I'm not saying I'm going to solve them. I can't, but I can listen. I can give some consolation. I can give some advice. I can do what I can do. And I think, especially today, when you and I grew up, that was, work and personal life, those are supposed to be completely separate. Well, that's not the world we live in. We live in, where I work, my wife works, we both work 10, 12 hours a day, and work and home life just kind of become one. And so I think if you want to be a good manager, if you want to be a good leader, you have to be vulnerable, you have to be willing to listen, and you have to be willing to help. And it is shocking today where I shared with you that I went to some networking event and I was talking to somebody and I said, well, what's going on at ABC Corp? And said, oh, you don't want to come here. Everything's all left up. And I think what is sad is I think that's becoming the norm, that we're squeezing our employees so much. Yes, if you work for Uber Uber's had their challenges, let's say Airbnb or Apple, or, most people would even consider Microsoft or Google, but those companies have issues too. So it's rarely as green on the other side of that fence as you think. So wherever you are, try to make an impact and be the difference. You know, I would advocate speaking up, but do it judiciously. I didn't do it judiciously, and that's not always so good for your career. I can tell you that from my experience. But that's who I am. So, you know, be who you are, believe in what you believe, but try to make an impact. And it's not all going to happen in a day. You know, one of the things I do some mentoring of some younger sales folks, and they think, many of them, it's kind of funny when you talk to them, they kind of go, "Oh, I'm just not making an impact." And I'm
Mhm.
like, "You've been there for 8 weeks." You know?
Yeah.
It can take years,
Yeah.
you know, and it's, you have to realize that, you know, yes, it's nice. We all read the story about Mark Zuckerberg and Facebook, right? Here's my favorite example. I tremendously admire Mark Zuckerberg. He's much smarter than I am. And what he's done is nothing short of phenomenal. And yet there's a lot of people that like to pick on him. And, you know, there's a very well-known, very smart writer named Kara Swisher. She runs Recode Decode and is part of the Vox Media Network. Anyway, very, very smart woman. I love her writing, but she's always picking on Mark Zuckerberg. And, you know, he's helped her every time he's let her interview him. And she's always picking on him. Facebook, you know, people forget this, but Facebook was an 8-year overnight success. And what I mean by that is I think it was 8 years before Peter Thiel, who was the first investor, put $500,000 into the company. Before that, they were scraping many, many times. Mark Zuckerberg's parents, God bless them, they put over $100,000 into that business so they could continue to buy servers. You know, this was pre-Amazon, AWS, Microsoft Azure, where you actually had to go out and buy hardware. So to keep Facebook running, they had to keep buying all this hardware, and they kept running out of money. And, you know, I'm a pretty nice guy, but if my kid comes to me after he dropped out of Harvard and wants $80,000 to buy hardware,
Yeah.
I'm going to be like, yeah, you know, I don't think so, kid.
That's some questions to ask. Yeah.
Yeah. And now it's all worked out for the best, but, you know, there's one of those every generation. You know, it was Bill Gates, the guys that started Google, you know, Steve Jobs and Wozniak. That doesn't come around very easily. And if you're going to do a startup, everybody forgets this is not a 1-year thing. It takes 10 years to build a company. And it took over 8 years before Facebook got even to Peter Thiel. And that was a lot of hard work. And it's, you've got to understand that making a change, making a difference, you know, they get there and you kind of look at the mountain and they see the top, but they kind of forget, well, there's this whole thing called a mountain in between that you have to climb. And so impact what you can within your circle of influence. And that's how you make change. And if we keep that in mind at all levels, whether you're an SDR, an entry-level salesperson, a sales development rep or a business development rep, an account executive, a sales manager, a director of sales operations, VP of sales, you have to work within your current circle of influence and what you can impact.
Yeah.
And if you stay focused on that, that's how you make change. And it's not always the grandiose change, but all that little stuff. In fact, one of the things that I've been very fortunate and done pretty well is I'm pretty good at getting that team to all row that boat in the same direction by saying, listen, here's what our goals are, you know, as in my goals for this quarter. And I try to keep it to 3 things, maybe 4. That's it. And then I want them to tell me, build their objectives to build up to mine. So what can you do that's going to help us get to here? And I try and get CEOs that I work for or that I work with on a consultative basis to do that. You know, don't try to do everything. Pick 3. You know, if you just pick 3 things to do every day, every quarter, every year, that's how you change the world, one day at a time. So
that's awesome. I think you hit on a lot of themes I see, especially with younger crowds, where everybody wants things overnight. Either that's the success, and there's the idea, especially down here in Orange County where I'm based, where you're going to start a company and it's going to become a billion-dollar unicorn in 6 to 12 months. And so why even think about the long-term employee health, you know, just work people 80 hours a week, and surely we're going to sell for $1 billion next summer. Which, to your point, that, what is that? 1 in 100, 1 in 1 million? I don't even know what the numbers are now for companies that make that. Or it's people who want to come in and just do a job and do the job well. And I can see totally people I've had that have reported to me that have said, I want to make a difference. Okay, well, understand the business, right? You can't come in as a change agent if you don't know what needs to change and understand why things are the way they are. Because companies, people, products, we evolve in reaction to something happening. So if you don't know what's happened, you don't know what's going on, and you come in and start spouting off about what's broken and what needs to change, you're going to have a really uphill battle with that. And that's you're not going to get the results. You're going to be frustrated. You're going to say this company is old, stodgy, and broken and can't be fixed. When in reality, just like we ask managers to do, people need to listen. They need to observe. They need to learn. And they need to come in with an open hand and say, okay, how do I help? What can we do? What's been done? And why won't this work? So that's something that I always try to tell people when I'm running teams, that understand what's going on before you start spouting off. And I've been as guilty as you are in my career of just coming in as the hotshot guy and saying, well, obviously you're all just not very smart. Because obviously I see the solution here, and there's obviously something wrong with you because this is how it should go. And I think with age and wisdom, we grow out of that and we realize, okay, maybe there's a reason why things are the way they are. Not that they should stay that way, but now let's think about solutions and changes in terms of what's happened before and what's going to take to actually make some lasting change. So I want to just kind of change our direction just a little bit here to talk a bit about your background, because I want to look at change in the context of what you've done. So you've been in sales, you've been in marketing, but your background was also in databases, operating systems. I mean, you've kind of run the gamut here. But in your time in sales and marketing, which one did you prefer and why? And how did you end up in there from your background in tech?
Oh, I guess I'm a jack of all trades and a master of none. No, I've been very fortunate. I started in sales. I came up kind of a traditional sales route, and then when Kevin Riegelsberger, one of the founders of Platinum Software, recruited me away from Microsoft, he was very smart. He kind of made it about me. And if there's one thing I can tell any company, if you want to hire above your weight, develop a hiring process and accelerate it, because nobody, especially good people, hate looking for work. And so if you can develop a hiring process that has different tools, I'm a big fan of using a scorecard, but don't leave hiring to HR. Hiring is something that you have to build across your entire team and be excellent at it if you want to win and hire the right kind of team. And so so Riegelsberger hired me into being a product manager. I'd never been a product manager. In fact, one of the main reasons I did it, literally when I was in sales, I always kind of looked at marketing and I was like, what the hell do those clowns do? And there's an old Dilbert cartoon that described it perfectly. It's a one-frame cartoon, and Dilbert, an engineer, has to go do a stint in marketing, and then the next frame shows him walking into marketing, and it's a door. It says marketing, 2-drink minimum, and that's kind of how I always thought of marketing.
Yeah.
And God bless him. When I got into marketing, oh my God, I developed a tremendous amount of respect. Very few CEOs that I've ever worked for really understand marketing. Marketing is the most important lever that any company has if used properly. The problem is it's rarely, if ever, used properly. And I'll give a couple of examples. So I came in to be a product manager for an enterprise resource planning system. It was really a big accounting system then. We developed some of the other stuff later. But I didn't know accounting. I didn't know how to create a chart of accounts. And yet I'm building this product. Now, thank God, I was essentially taking an enterprise product and kind of repackaging it for small to medium business. And that became one of the flagship products of the company. And I learned a lot, and I was drinking from the fire hose, but I forced myself to learn a lot about marketing, and I developed a tremendous amount of respect for it. And because it was a turnaround, I I was able to, if I did things right, you got noticed and you got promoted. And so I went from being a product manager to senior product manager to director of inside sales, director of marketing, and then finally VP of marketing and business development. And that was over about 6 years. But I forced myself to learn all the time. And I consider myself a lifelong learner. But learning those things on how can marketing be a leverage point for the business? And if you do marketing right, sales gets a whole lot easier.
Mm-hmm.
And when you and I were coming up, sales was important and marketing was kind of that other thing. Oh yeah, those are the folks that make the brochures and run the webinar and put the box together that we ship the product in. It wasn't one of the first things. It was one of the 10th things I did when I was at Platinum. We were selling a product that cost a couple of $100,000. Okay, that's a lot of money. I called the warehouse and said, "Can I, give me the product. Send me one over. I want to see what it looks like."
Yeah.
Literally, it was a brown box. You opened it up, and the first thing that you saw was something that said bug list.
Jeez.
Okay, that was the first thing. Now, this customer just spent a couple $100,000 with us. They're going to spend another $100,000 on an implementation. And that's the first thing you see is your customer experience. I mean, that's just screwed up.
That's terrible.
So I said, we got to change this, and it took some time, but we put it together. So it was actually a nice box. First thing that happened when you opened it up was, do you want to know who the most important person at Platinum Software is? You open it up and it says, "You are. Please fill out this registration so we know how to get a hold of you and you know how to get a hold of us." It's the little things like that. Creating that experience that is pleasant. It was a nice package. Everything was organized. Back in the day when you had floppy disks, there were floppy disks in this box. There's documentation in this one. There's implementation, who to call. And so it made sense. It was logical. But that's the kind of stuff when a company is growing fast that people forget about. And literally, they literally would just grab these binders and throw them in a box and ship it to a customer.
Yeah.
And so forcing yourself to go through all those little things, that's where marketing can make a big difference. That's where marketing can become a lever point for you. And I would argue that as a small company, you should invest as much in marketing as you are in sales, because part of the reason, you'd ask me, which do I prefer? I don't prefer either. In fact, I kind of go against the grain. I want to run both. If one of the reasons my last job as chief revenue officer, I owned both. And I like that, because what happens is the buck stops here. And sales can't say, well, marketing's giving us crappy leads. And marketing can't say, well, sales can't close anything we give them. There's one person responsible for both sides of that house. And I can get them working in the same direction and making them work together. That's where it becomes important. That's where it can become a huge leverage point, where they're working together, appreciating each other and understanding what each other does. And that's what most organizations really struggle with. Sometimes as startups, sometimes as large companies. You remember when you and I were at Microsoft at different times, but we used to get all this crap from marketing when you were out field sales. You never read half of it because it wasn't valuable.
Yeah.
And they just weren't working together. And I'm hopefully they've improved that now. I have no idea, but in large companies, it becomes very challenging for those two organizations to have respect for each other and not just become two warring factions that are costing a lot of money and not delivering a tremendous amount of value to each other.
Yeah, I saw that. I was more on the engineering side as a program manager, product manager at Microsoft, but we very rarely saw the marketing team. I mean, I think maybe we saw them when we released the product, and then they were out there touting the features. And we, as the engineering side of the house, would say, but that's not even what we built, like, to focus on. Like, you guys picked out of the 100 things we built, you picked the 3 that we didn't even focus on. And then it would get out in the marketplace and it would just not sell. And then the question would come back and say, well, what went wrong? And everybody would say, oh, well, marketing didn't get it. Well, did we ever talk to marketing? Did they ever come and sit in our meeting? Did we sit in their meeting? Did we understand what was going on? And we didn't have it. And to your point, that's a pretty expensive endeavor, right? Then you have all these engineers building something, and then you can't market it. And then, of course, you can't sell it. And both sides of the house are not talking to each other, plus the sales team talking to the marketing team. And so you just have that breakdown of communication that's going to cause some problems.
I certainly hope they fixed it, but Microsoft for a long time was very guilty of what I call focus group marketing. Well, we did a focus group and they said this, so that's what we're going to market. Yeah, but that's not what we built. That's a lot of big companies get into that disease. And that's part of that is they've become a victim of their own success. They've made so much money that they're hiring all these people to do all these different functions.
Yeah.
And I'm a big believer. Bezos says it best. Any project, if you've got more people than you can feed with a large pizza, it's too many people.
Yeah.
And I believe Amazon. One of the things you have to admire about Amazon, again, a lot of people like to poke fun and say this or say that. That is a very well run company. And I'm going to repost this actually, but one of the things that has always impressed me, I looked at an interview recently from Jeff Bezos from about 12 years ago. And it's funny, you could tell it's 12 years ago because he still had hair. But what was funny, it was around the whole battle between bricks and mortar and online and stuff. And this newscaster kept asking Jeff these questions about, brick and mortar versus online. And Jeff just kind of ignored him. He said, I'm not sure if you understand, we don't care. All we care about is the customer. And we want to deliver the best experience we possibly can for that customer. If you interviewed Jeff Bezos today, I guarantee you it would sound exactly the same.
Yeah.
Because if there's one thing that they've maintained is that maniacal focus on customer obsession. And that's why they're great. And when we started Novus RX in 2010, and even up till I left the company, I would do support calls often, and on weekends. We had a physician once that was having a problem. And the only time they couldn't accommodate him was on a Saturday night. So I said, no problem. Well, Saturday at 7:00, we'll, call this number. So we're on the phone and, we help him. And he was using our free version. And this was a very senior guy at Duke University, probably making about $700,000 a year. And he chose that particular time where we're helping him through this crisis, myself and one of the co-founders, who's a physician, to tell us that we were charging too much for our software at $199 a year. And he was still using the free version. And he had screwed up his database by not following directions. But it didn't, it didn't bother me at all. But my co-founder, who I've never seen get upset, was really getting ticked off at the guy. But it was being willing to do that call on a Saturday night. We did that all the time. Why? Because the customer needed it. And even though he hadn't paid us a dime yet, we still handheld him till we solved his problem. It took about an hour and a half.
Yeah.
And it's any company I've ever been at, it's that kind of stuff that has made just a big difference in the way that you handle the customer and the way that they remember you. And Amazon, they have embodied that throughout their history. And I think it's one of the reasons they've been so successful.
Yeah. So we just have a couple minutes left here, but one thing I did want to touch on is the results, because I think a lot of companies struggle with marketing because they can't quantify success. Like we put a bunch of money in, did it work? How do you know, right? Because the sales team will say, well, we're just great salespeople. And the product team will say, well, we just built the best product in the world. So how do you quantify that? And do you have any examples from your background where you can say, yeah, we did this thing and it led to this result for marketing?
Yeah, it's gotten a lot easier, but you really should try to quantify everything. I'm Scotch Irish, so I'm one of the cheapest clowns you'll ever meet on the planet. And I spend the company's money like I spend my money. So when I'm investing in marketing, I'm trying to find leverage points. So paid search, basic organic search, that's where I generally start. And you can track very closely what's coming in. And we used to track this all in spreadsheets. So you don't need all these fancy CRM tools and Pardot and all the marketing management tools, but they're useful and they're next to free. So just use one. I don't care which one, just pick one and use it. But you want to track those things. Now, we tend to get caught up in metrics, and we always will. And sometimes the metrics aren't that accurate, and we think that they are. And that's okay, but you want to be able to try and track it down as best as you can. So Where did that lead come from? Everybody gets into, well, is that a marketing qualified lead? Is that a sales qualified lead? Did that turn into a deal? That's really important. I don't care if you call it an MQL or an SQL, just define it. If somebody raises their hand, that's a lead. Do they have budget? Do they have authority? Do they have a time frame? And you want to track all those leverage points as much as you can, but don't kid yourself. I read a lot of blog posts. I've never bought anything out of something I've read on a blog post, but you still got to have a blog.
Yeah.
Because you want to have good content to bring those people in. And so you're going to invest in a lot of those different things, and you want to know which ones are working, but don't kid yourself. Just because something turned into a deal, it might have started at a blog post. It may not have been because they filled out that gated content on your website to get the ebook. And I'm a big fan of ebooks, but if you want to differentiate yourself, don't make them fill out the form. Remove the friction. A lot of them just want the data. They want the information. They may or may not buy from you ever, but remove the friction. There are times to have the gated content up there so that you can track and build your mailing list and all those things and do those things. But do track it. So, I'm a big fan of finding high leverage points. So I'd rather invest in content. And then when they come to us, we can see them hit the website. We can see them engage, make an inbound phone call, fill out a form on the website. And then you can start to track how much money did you spend and what did it cost at each one of those leverage points down to closing that deal.
Mm-hmm.
And that attribution is very important, but do realize at some level, there's just a level of ambiguity you can't track to. But putting those metrics in place and those performance indicators in place, that's how you justify marketing, measure everything, and test everything. So even though, they've always done it this way, try something different. Spend at least 15% of your marketing budget doing testing, trying different things, seeing what works, finding new leverage points. Those are what I've done again and again that have paid off for the biggest returns for the company in general.
That's awesome. And John, that's a great place for us to stop, because it's almost like we have come full circle in terms of testing, which means you're going to have some things that aren't going to work and they're going to fail, but that's okay. So you'll make a mistake, you'll try something, you'll figure out what's not working, and you'll learn from it. So that's a great way for us to bring this all back to a close. So John, it's been a real pleasure talking with you today. Thank you so much for being a guest and very active participant on Smarter Change podcast today.
Hassan, thank you. It's always a pleasure.
The pleasure is mine. Thanks again, everyone, for joining us today. Please hit subscribe and visit me on HassanArcher.com and LinkedIn. And if you have led meaningful change in your company or organization, please reach out to me. I'm always looking for interesting people with great stories to interview, and maybe I can get you in on a future episode. So thanks again, John, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks.